Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this workshop on character design with waste materials. My name is Liv and I work in the recruitment and outreach team at NUA, and I'll be here throughout the workshop today to make sure it runs as smoothly as possible. I'll be handing over to Valentina very shortly, who will be leading the workshop for us today. But before we get going, I do have some house rules to go through with you first. We'd be really grateful if you could please keep your audio and video muted throughout the majority of today's session. There will be moments where we might like to see your work and see how you're getting on with the workshop. And at those points, if you're happy to share your audio and video, you can let us know by typing yes into the chat, and we can facilitate you sharing your video and audio with everyone in the workshop. Do please make sure that there's nothing inappropriate in your background or anything that gives out any personal information about yourself. We will also be recording the session today, so please don't worry if you have any technical problems. We will be making the recording available to you afterwards, so you won't miss anything. It is worth bearing in mind that if you do decide to come on screen and share your audio and video, that will be recorded, and we will be sending that out to everyone that attended. So just worth bearing that in mind. If Valentina has any technical problems, for example, if Valentina's internet connection drops out, we'll try to reconnect for around 5 minutes before abandoning the session. So apologies in advance if that happens, but as I've said, there will be a recording that we'll make available to you afterwards, so you can complete the workshop in your own time afterwards. We will have the chat open for today's workshop. But please, we would ask that you don't message anyone privately and just keep your messages in the open chat. Also, again, please don't share any personal information about yourself in the chat. If you see or hear anything inappropriate, or you have any questions or concerns about the workshop or your situation at home, please do message me privately and I'll be on hand to help and assist you throughout the workshop today. One last technical thing from me before we get going is that when we get into the making element of the workshop, it's worth noting that there are 3 little dots next to Valentina's video. And if you click those, there's an option to pin video. And what that means is that Valentina's video is shared as the main image of the Zoom session. And then the PowerPoint presentation is the smaller little image, which you can then make slightly bigger. So what that means is that you'll be able to follow along a lot better with the workshop and hopefully give you a much better experience. Hopefully Valentina will remind you of that when we get to that section, but I'll also pop a note in the chat for you as well. But otherwise that's it from me. So I'll hand over to Valentina now to get going with the workshop.
Thank you, Liv. So nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Valentina Huckova. I originally come from Slovakia, and I have studied BA animation at NUA, and I'm currently a master's student at the Film and Moving Image and Sound MA course. Today's workshop is about designing characters for animation from rubbish. So using 2D animation specifically is what we will be keeping in mind, and we'll be using our available materials that you might just have lying around the house, or hopefully clean rubbish that you've pre-prepared, to create designs that you can then utilize. On the right here on this first slide, you can see a picture by a Japanese artist called Makaon, who uses papercraft templates for origami, and he then works with aluminum cans to create these 3D sized models. So this is a great example of recycled art and a creative approach to using materials which would otherwise be trashed and perhaps not given another life. So today, our main attention is on giving new life to materials, but using creativity to design something that has a purpose. Our action plan for today is, first we will look at cutout animations in the past and present. We will do a bit of an introduction to the history, which I will talk you through. So going from historical cutout animation all the way to modern time. Then I would like to explain a little bit about working with recycled materials. And we will then presently move on to designing your characters by explaining some design theory, as well as then progressing on to the physical making of the characters, by which point I would like you to pin my video so you can see what I'm doing as well as the presentation. Towards the end of this workshop, we will also cover basic ground of how we can visually plan stories. And this is something that you can then do after this workshop today. So you can then go on storyboarding, planning your story, and then animating it through some useful advice, which I will talk you through. Firstly then, so animation, I'm sure everybody has some idea or other about what animation is. It's omnipresent, it's everywhere around us. So it's everywhere from commercials to feature-length films to TV shows, and it's on your phones, it's on all of our gadgets. So an animation, you could just see this slide change, that's also an animation. But the animation which I would like to talk about today is, as I already mentioned, 2D cutout. So it's flat animation on a flat background using 2D shapes and then animating that through moving what you already have. So not necessarily changing anything, but using the objects that you will create your puppets out of, and then animating these over frames. So the origin of 2D cutout animation has its birth in shadow play or shadow puppet theater. This is an ancient form of storytelling which originated in Indonesia and ancient China. And as you can see on the images, the purpose of shadow play is that the puppet master is controlling these flat and very articulated 2D cutouts of different colors and controlling them on a translucent screen with the source of light going from behind the screen so that the audience can see what is happening as if it is being animated by itself. So the puppet master is not really visible. You can see that on the second picture on the right here. And you can then creatively use colors for your characters as well to make sure you give the audience quite an entertaining experience. Another example here of beautifully articulated characters. So you can start to observe that in terms of character design for 2D cutouts, it's very important that the characters are distinguishable. So you want to make sure that they have very strong character designs, which is what we'll be covering today. A very important German animator, one of the first 2D cutout animators of the 20th century, is Lotte Reiniger. She made her first film in around 1919, but published it in 1926. Its name is The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, which is what you can see in the GIFs on screen right now. So you can see she works with paper cutouts, silhouetted paper cutouts. So she works with plain black paper and uses this silhouetted animation to conceal within that. So when she animates, she can hide things because you only see a flat color. You don't need to see any extra details. And I've included the link to the YouTube video in the further resources which you will be receiving after the workshop. So you can watch behind the scenes of Lotte Reiniger from the early 20th century after the workshop is done. In the meantime, I would like you to appreciate the elaborate detail that she uses when she works with paper cutouts. Another great example from the 20th century is Terry Gilliam, the former member of Monty Python's comedy troupe and also the animator behind Monty Python's Flying Circus. So Terry Gilliam, a well-renowned film director and animator, he uses ready-made graphics or photographs. So for example, newspaper cutouts or magazine cutouts to create these very tongue-in-cheek humor animations. You can see some examples here. It still requires a lot of time, but he saves himself the process of creating individually all of those cutout elements by using what is already created. So this is also something you can keep in mind when we design our characters later. And just to mention present time cutout animation, you might be aware of the adult animation South Park, but you might not have known that before South Park was digitalized into its present form, it originated as a stop motion pilot episode. So the creators of South Park used numerous paper cutouts, painstakingly created and exchanged every time the facial expression had to change, as you can see on the picture here on the left. So numerous head replacements, body replacements, and facial expression replacements, all handmade, which then gets exchanged every time you take a picture to create the stop motion animation. This has then been taken on board when they digitalized the animation. So they wanted to keep that ready-made feel of the visuals, even though they already digitalized their process. And one more example of present time animation is Michaela Mihaly, a Slovak animator from a prestigious Czech University of Animation and Film. And she created, and she still creates, incredibly detailed paper cutouts. So the visuals of them are quite minimalistic, but the effect that she can create with paper goes from 2D onto 3D. So you can see the hands here are bent into 3D space. So it's giving that paper cutout animation a new level. And you can start thinking about whether a 3D design of your character has more power than a 2D design. And you can also watch an example of her work later. This is a behind the scenes of the same image I've shown you in the previous slide. So here you can once again see the numerous replacement body parts, the limbs, and you can start to imagine how much work this takes. So this is the main shot. It's framed with masking tape to make sure you have some kind of action lines when your camera is shooting. And you then, for every shot you take, replace the movement or replace the body part with a different paper cutout every time you take a picture, and that's what creates the animation. So you can watch this afterwards. I've also included a link to her work in the further resources. And finally, perhaps most important for this workshop is why we are using recycled art. So the whole point of recycled art at its heart is repurposing and reusing materials without limits. So there's an element of activism here, making sure we don't waste and we appreciate what we have and perhaps try to minimize our impact on the environment and on the planet Earth. So in this way, I would like you to consider that stop motion animation actually can create a lot of waste. And the animator behind Cat Stevens' new stop motion video, director Chris Hopewell, decided that because the song itself, which you can watch later, has an environmental message, this is why this video, the animated video itself, should really carry that across. So about 90% of the materials they have used is actually recycled. And I think that's really great, and that's what we will be doing today, so working with recycled materials. Now we are ready to move on to designing our characters. So first of all, before the workshop, hopefully you've prepared with the pre-workshop task. Just to remind you, the task was to pick at least 6 different pieces of rubbish or recycling which appealed to you, and look for clean and dry materials to make sure that you can work with these efficiently. You could have also looked for materials of different colors and sizes. Perhaps you could have found materials with your favorite color or materials which appeal to you. My top tip at that point was for you that soft and malleable rubbish is easier to work with, but you might need sturdy and solid materials so that you can create the bones, so to say, of the design, so the character's spine or the limbs or maybe a tail or horns. And I wanted you to select a variety. So if you have done this task, and even if you haven't, you can quickly run to your recycling bin. So if you now, hopefully, have at least 6 different pieces of rubbish, it's essential that you lay them out in front of you on your desk, table, or wherever you are positioned right now. So make sure to lay them out in front of you quite clearly so that you can really start to observe what materials you have, and then you can keep them in mind during the next bit of the presentation. So starting with a bit of character design theory before we actually move on to the making process, now that you have your materials in front of you, I would like you to consider the following theory of core shapes and shape language. So in animation and in character design, it's essential that we understand that shapes are understood in a certain way by the human brain. Characters can be made from 3 core shapes, which is the circle, square, and triangle, and a variation of these. So this is especially useful if you start to imagine the most famous animated features and TV shows of all time. You can start to observe that they really do follow these basic shapes and the variations of them, so elliptical shapes or prolonged rectangles. And this character design is essentially telling us how we should be understanding the role of the character. So if you take a look here in the middle, we have Jafar, the main villain of the movie or of the animation. He has quite pointy shoulders and very pointy elements on him. Whereas the main positive characters, for example, the genie, he's very rounded, he's very soft, but he also has an element of strength in him with his wide shoulders. So the following theory explains nicely why we perceive that oval shapes are seen as safe and soft and friendly. This is because we know from evolution that babies or puppies or young baby animals are generally quite round, perhaps a bit chubby, they're safe, they're harmless and friendly. This is why animators and character designers use this bit of evolutionary knowledge that we all understand in our collective subconscious to design characters who are meant to be friendly, who are meant to be the protagonists, the positive guys, the good characters of the show. On the other hand, triangle shapes, which we can see in claws and sharp teeth or horns, they are perceived as dangerous. So often villain characters, characters of the main antagonists, they will carry these triangular shapes so that we know they are meant to be bad, even though perhaps the character turns out to be the concealed protagonist or the good guy. They will still be designed with this in mind. So they will carry quite a lot of triangular elements in the crown, in the teeth, maybe in the outfit itself, with horns, with the hair. And finally, square shapes are usually perceived as something very stable and strong. So the hero character, or a strong hero character especially, will be following this design principle of having very wide square shoulders. So you can see examples from Wreck-It Ralph or Up. So these characters are meant to represent either stubbornness or dependability, confidence, and a really strong protagonist element to them. Moving on from core shapes, I would definitely like you to consider the power of silhouettes. So when you think about the silhouette, you are basically thinking of what their shadow would look like. So what the shadow of a character would look like if the character was only limited to one flat black color. So what you're looking at now, I believe some of you might recognize the designs and where they come from. They come from the TV show Adventure Time, of course, and you can tell that each of them is so expertly designed, you wouldn't really confuse one character for another, even if they are just the shadows of the character design. So even reduced to just black outline, you can still see they are very different characters. And this is actually due to the fact that the character designer utilizes negative space. So when you look at the character, you usually design with positive space in mind. You want to make sure that it's got arms or limbs or some specific characteristics. But what I want you to really think about through this workshop is how can you utilize negative space? So maybe the space between the limbs or the space between the horns or somewhere around the body, which will really communicate strongly the silhouette of the character. And this will then add strength to the design. Now, we are ready to actually progress into making your character. So by this point, I would like you to definitely pin my video if you can, as well as look at the presentation. So if you can do this now, you'll be able to see my process of how I am working. First of all, I would like you to look at the materials you have in front of you and choose between 3 to 4 pieces of rubbish or waste materials, something that makes the material interesting. So I will show you what materials I've got. I've prepared a variety of this netting from Fruits and Veg. It's my personal favorite material of choice. And I would like you to decide which materials are the most interesting to actually work with. So get to know your materials, look carefully, have a feel, try to create sound out of them. So rustle them, listen, and start to think about how they can be used. I will show you an example character, which I've created from waste for the trial run of this workshop. So you can see I've used netting, I've used a coffee container lid made from aluminium, and I've used a broken piece of plastic, which all would have been thrown out, and also a bit of optic cable left over to create some hair. I've put this together with paper tape or blue tack for minimum waste. So just as an example, it's quite good to consider, I want you to create something nice, simple for this workshop so that you then have the knowledge to make something more elaborate and complicated next time or in your free time. So you don't have to be creating masterpieces at this point, because that might require more time than the workshop allows us. But here's just one example of what I've made with my years of expertise. You know, it's a nice and simple design. It's not going to win the Picasso's prize for fine art sculpture, but it's a good example of what type of rough and ready work we might be expected to produce. So I've picked some nettings. I've picked a plastic fork, which was already food contaminated, so I wouldn't be using it for much else other than art projects. I've also got the broken top of a toothbrush. Again, if you're working with your own materials, you might feel safer in terms of hygiene than if you're using other people's waste rubbish, so keep that in mind. And also an exclaimer: be very careful. If your materials have sharp edges, especially like my aluminium lid has quite sharp edges, which I didn't realize, be very careful that you don't cut yourself or hurt yourself in any way. So health and safety, please do be mindful when you're using, even when you're just using your scissors. Be careful, because I did cut my finger on this. So I'll be more mindful this time. Other materials I've picked: a metal piece of a steamer. So a very old steamer, which already is broken, would have ended up in landfill or in recycling, but it is contaminated over years. So I've actually decided this is a great project for a stop motion project. I kept it, and a piece of it fell out. So for this workshop, out of my 3 to 4 pieces of rubbish, I'm definitely using this little piece of metal, as well as at least one piece of netting. Again, I've chosen some single-use plastic cutlery, tiny things for ice cream. So I've got a nice variety of colors, which I was really mindful of when I picked my materials. And finally, to wrap it up, I've got this piece of yellow string, which is actually an optic cable from an internet installation a few weeks ago. So this all would have ended up in the bin, but it's a great material to work with. So I've got these following materials. Now, I would like to make sure that you have your 3 or 4 pieces of rubbish that you feel are quite interesting to work with. And once you've gotten to know your materials and looked for which ones really stand out as strong pieces that you can imagine creating a character with, I will now show you an example. So on this next slide, you can see that you can work with your materials in a variety of ways. So these are some images from the internet which show you 2D flat cutouts in this case. So they are using ready-made graphics or patterns, perhaps cuttings from magazines and newspapers, definitely, and books as well. Or you might start to consider 2.5D or 3D form. This is entirely up to you and up to your level of skill within animation, whether you want to then be working with flat animation like the examples I've showed you, or if you want to start thinking of a 3D setup, which is a bit more complicated. The reason for this is that working with 3D setup in animation, in stop motion, you need support for your characters. So for example, what I've created last session for the trial, this would not be usable for 3D. There is no stability. I would not be able to place this anywhere and film it in 3D. I would have to work with a flat background like so, and then move it pretending that it is standing because it's a flat background. If you want to be thinking in 3D, however, for the design process, you are more than welcome to. It will simply change how you can then use it for the animation process. Now, an example of the animation is, this is what a 2D cutout can look like once you animate it. So this character has very simple joints, distinguished on the feet, because he needs to be able to walk to create the walk cycle. So I would like you to consider, before you design your character, what movement you might want the character to do. So if you are willing to animate your character in the near future, what movement will it have to do? Does it have to walk, run, jump, fly? If you are creating your character with animation in mind, it changes the way you design it. So be very mindful of, can I create a movable character if I use these elements? And then how will I attach it? So will I use blue tack? Will I use paper tape maybe? And can I really create a nice and smooth movement? So consider this even before we start the design process. So just take a moment. And what we will be doing next now is drawing the sketches, so very rough doodling. Before then, one more example of cutout animation design. So the characters for cutout animation, usually they have really elaborate joints. As I said, you need to know which part of the character will be moving. Will it be the wrist or the elbow? Will it be the hips or the head? So for example, a simple animal design or a simple humanoid design will have multiple joints. You can do this with blue tack. You don't need push pins. If you have them, great. Blue tack generally allows you more movability, so it's not so permanent. It doesn't create a hole, so you can still animate your character very nicely with a piece of blue tack. Now, when you are designing, I would like you to think also about the following elements. So shape, color of the character, the form. So this is what I've mentioned in terms of shape language, proportions of your character. So the size of it and the proportions between individual body elements of the character. The posing, very crucial is the posing. So for example, the character I've designed before has, you could say, a neutral pose. So it's not really doing anything specifically interesting, but if I wanted to design a strong pose, I would probably aim for something non-symmetrical. So right now it's the same on each side, as you can see. If I want to design a character who has a very strong character design, then I would probably maybe shift the angle of my design, make sure there is some distinguishing characteristics in the posing. Think about the clothing. Does your character need to wear any special clothes or props? So these are the following elements that I want you to consider. And we will now be moving on towards design drawing. So I will now give you 5 minutes, approximately, to draw a very rough sketch or a doodle of what you think your character will look like. So first of all, hopefully you have somewhere near you pen or pencil and scrap paper or paper. And if you want to be very mindful and conscious of your paper usage, you can also perhaps use your gadget. So if you have a phone, smartphone, or a tablet, you might want to open the notes. And in the notes, for example, on an iPad, in the notes, you can actually draw. So I will be doing this now, just to limit my paper waste. But as a top tip, I can also advise you that if you have loo rolls, which you might know are not actually recyclable, loo rolls you can then carefully take apart from their roll, and you then get these interesting shapes, 2 or 3 of them, and you can then use this for sketching or for art creation. So importantly, to bring things together, my design from last time, this guy, started out with a very rough doodle, which I've then changed to create a second doodle. And this is the one I decided to create. So what I want you to do now, when you have your pen and pencil and your scrap paper, I want you to doodle a rough character drawing made of your chosen materials. So by which point you've already chosen 3 to 4 materials from your collection. Imagine how you will draw these materials. I want you to draw loose and quick. Focus on capturing the basic shapes. I'm not expecting observational drawings of the highest standard. I really want you to just connect with the drawing process without any pressure. So draw loose and quick, focus on the basic shapes, and try to capture the material's properties. Will you use the whole materials? Will you be using the entire material? Can you change its shape? Can you maybe cut things down? Can you amend the size of them? So you can consider this when you draw, because this will inform your character design. Is it changeable? Is it amendable? Will you change the shape to create a character differently? And will your character have any distinguishing characteristics like a face? How many limbs? What species will it be? Is it a humanoid character, an animal, mystical creature? So the 5 minutes to doodle your sketch start now. I'll be showing you what I'm doing in my process. But don't let that disturb you. So I'll be waffling on about what I'm doing, but I would like you to do your own character design at the same time. So please get your pen and paper or your digital gadgets and start drawing, even just with your finger on your tablets, etc. So I've got this piece of metal. I will be using this as my main body structure because it looks quite interesting. I can turn it many ways. It's got these nice holes which add a texture. So thinking maybe I'll start with this direction. So I will doodle the main structure of this. Okay, now thinking about the other materials I've showed you, I've got these plastic spoons, we can say. I think they would work quite well for limbs, either arms or legs. Okay, I'm gonna go for arms this time. So one spoon for an arm and one for another arm. I'm starting to get some limbs into my design. We've then got this toothbrush head, the head of the cut head of a toothbrush. I think this could be an interesting head or maybe a headpiece. So I'm gonna go with that. I'm just gonna roughly doodle the shape of the toothbrush, and I'm gonna include the fact that it has the toothbrush bristles because that's the interesting point of the design. Okay, got my toothbrush head now added. I'm not distinguishing colors at this point, as you can see, but mentally I'm taking a note of how this will work together. So I've got a metal, I've got these colorful plastics, and I've got this pink headpiece. So it's going to create a nice contrast, and it's all in good proportion. I've also decided to use my netting. Okay, so looking at my netting now, and looking at the other colors, I think I will go with this purple one. You might see there's a difference in texture between each of them. Some of them are for garlic, some are for onions. So this one from some fruit and veg, from onions as well. This one has a very wide texture. So I think I'll have to somehow make it work for me by maybe twisting it in place or attaching it maybe with a piece of a rubber elastic band. So if I do this, I think I can start to see it could work as sleeves or legs. So for this design, I will choose to use this as legs. I will add that into the picture. These big fluffy trouser legs. Okay, so you can start to see I've got a very basic humanoid character here with 2 arms and 2 legs. You can go for something more exciting though. And in terms of any interesting details, I should definitely add a face. I feel like if you add eyes to your character and maybe a smiley face, it instantly changes the entire perception of it. So I've got some materials that I can use for cutting out eyes. For example, these nettings always come with a label, non-recyclable label attached to them. So if I take this label off with the scissors, which I've prepared, then I think I'll be able to use this to create eyes out of it. And then I've got my permanent markers to decorate it in the end. So if I will be creating eyes, I would attach them to the middle of the body. I wouldn't attach it to the toothbrush. Perhaps it's a bit difficult to see it now, but my eyes would be somewhere here in the middle of the body. So it's a late thought, therefore the sketch doesn't really show it well enough. And in terms of feet, maybe I can doodle big feet made of cardboard. Okay, so there we go. Ooh, okay. Here would be my completed character sketch. Now, our 5 minutes have passed, but don't worry. I want you now to look at your materials again and think how you can mix them up differently. So I actually want you to scrap what you have done, or I mean, keep it, keep the proof of what you've done, but create another version. So get loose and really make sure you're iterating freely, that you don't feel just emotionally stuck to your first drawing of your character, that you are actually willing to change up the order of the character and design something new. So try to make it as different from the first one as possible and repeat this step however many times you like when you are actually designing your characters later on. So for this workshop, I will now give you 2 more minutes to change the process, to sketch up a new character. So what I will do is I will open a new note on the iPad, or you can turn your scrap paper around. The doodles you make can be small. They don't have to be massive. Okay, so what I will do now, I will again look at the materials I've got. And because I've already used them in a certain way, I'm going to change the way I'm using them now. It doesn't have to be very dramatic, but I want you to make sure you're comfortable changing your creative process. Okay, so I've just roughly rearranged them now on my table, and I will start the doodling process once again. So, first of all, quite a basic thing to do, I will actually change the direction and angle of the main body part. So I've flipped it now, 180 degrees. Then I will use what I've used as trousers before. So my purple netting, this will actually become sleeves of a big puff jacket. It will look a bit different than my sketch, of course, but let's keep in mind, these are big sleeves. Then I will use my plastic elements to create legs this time, not arms, but legs. Okay. And now, perhaps I will use the toothbrush in the same way as I've done before. So it will be the headpiece because I can't really fit it anywhere else. So I'll make my toothbrush headpiece in a way such as this. And I can see I'm missing some details. So again, I would like to design a face. Perhaps I will use one more element this time. I've got some extra rubbish lying around, so I'll use this little bottle cap with a nice green color. It will add a good contrast. And when I use this bottle cap, I can then draw the face on top of it. So this green bottle cap will become the central piece, on top of which I can then doodle eyes, which is quite desirable in the case of expanding your character design. So when you're drawing your faces, think about, are they visible? Do you need a permanent marker? How is it all going to work? Okay, so it's not greatly visible, unfortunately, but I will show you. Okay, a little face. So you'll see what I've done when we actually go into making. For yourself, it's important you understand your sketch design. Great, so 2 minutes have passed. Hopefully by now you have a variation of your sketch. So something as loose as I've done last time with my 2 different sketch designs on the loo roll. You've got basic shapes, you've got the circle, you've got the rounded shape, not quite a circle, and some very squarey trousers made here, and then a rough line for the arms. So something like a very easy doodle will then help us into creation mode. Now, I want you to choose which character you will make. So in the next task, which will be taking us towards the creation, I want you to compare your drawings, however many you've made. If it's 1 drawing, go with that one. If you've got 2 drawings, choose between them. Which one do you think stands out better as a character design? Which one will be easier for you to make? And how will you pick which one you think is a stronger character design? So looking at my 2 designs here, one with funky trousers, one with funky arms, it's quite a tough decision. Okay, I think in terms of what will be easier to make, it will definitely be the first one, because the little bottle top that I wanted to use for the head is actually not going to work with a black marker. I would have to spend more time decorating my character. So what I will do, I've immediately decided, in this case, the first sketch will be what I will create. Sometimes it's good to go with what you've designed with your innermost intuition. And other times it's much better to go with iteration. So look for how advanced your creation might have become over many iterations. So now that we're making this, I want you to get your equipment and materials in place. So if you're needing scissors and maybe paper tape or blue tack, make sure you've got them ready so you can start working now, because the time will be against us when we get actually into the making process. We're hopefully going to get into the zone where you lose track of time. So when you have your materials ready and you have your rubbish assembled and ready, you know what you're making, I want you to now start making it at this very moment. If you need to glue things together, think about what is the best way? Is it the paper tape? Is it a glue stick? Maybe blue tack? Or are you going to just assemble them without attaching anything to anything? In which case, it's actually easier to animate for you. So if you're animating, you will have it flat on a background, probably paper or your desk. So if it's not attached, it's easier for you to move individual elements around. For the sake of the design, however, if it needs to be attached, do so with blue tack or with your paper tape. So I will be starting my design process now, and I will show you my messy table with all the rubbish. So bear in mind, I want you to see what I'm working on. So this is my space here. This is the materials I have decided to use as follows. And here we go. So get rid of all rubbish that you don't need. And let's start with the making. Okay, starting with my trousers. So I'm still referencing the sketch I have right next to me. These will be my trousers. This will be the body. Now, maybe contrary to the sketch, I can actually still change what I've doodled and amend the design. So for example, I can change the angle of this piece of metal quite easily because it's not really a problem. And I can then try to just use this rubber band, which I've already attached, to actually minimize my waste of glue. So if I use, if this even works, if I can somehow attach the trousers just with the rubber band, which separate them into two separate legs, then I've won myself some free time. So maybe I'll tie it around and tie it around once more. Okay, the rubber band just cracked, but no worries, I can still tie it back together. So please, guys, individually now be making your character designs. Even though you might be tempted to just observe what I'm doing, it will be much more fun if you can actually make your own character design. And if you're happy to share them at the end of the session, you will have a chance to share them in the chat here or on our Instagram page by tagging us. So that would be very exciting for me to see what you have made. Okay, I have now attached the trousers. They're quite wonky, which is good for posing. They look like hip-hop trousers. Okay, I've got my limbs here. So I will be attaching these as according to my drawing. And I'll be using paper tape for this. So I've prepared some colored paper tape here. I'll just take a piece off and I will glue my, I will paste tape the limbs with a piece of paper tape. It's not going to be quite sturdy enough, but for the purpose of 2D cutout animation, there is no pressure of the 3D having to stand up on its own feet, etc. So even having things loosely glued together, it will still help you achieve what you need to do easily. So you don't need to use, the super glue to create your character. You can loosely tape things, and if they fall apart or if they fall off, you can just retape them with a new piece of your paper tape. So I've got my arms. Oh, you see, they've just fallen off. But what I want to show you is that for the animation's sake, even if they fall off now, if I have it on a flat background, then I'm actually easily able to control the position of my arm quite easily. So you can see I can pose it, and that's what we're aiming for. So if you're thinking about what movement your character needs to do, keep that in mind now. Okay, I've got my limbs. I'm going to check my sketch. So looking back to the initial sketch I've made, I need to now attach the toothbrush headpiece. This might be a little complicated. How can I attach this now? I suppose paper tape is my best friend in this case, unless I want to bet on glue tack, sorry, which I don't. So, okay, piece of paper tape again. I can cut it up into thin strips so that I can attach it from multiple angles. So I'll turn my character around and attach it from the back. The piece will go here to the neck. Okay. piece will go across the as if shoulder of my toothbrush. If I treat this as the neck of the character, but actually it's meant to be a headpiece. And then another piece. So I'm creating a neckline with my paper tape, which for me is fine because it's a part of the decoration. But if you want to be very picky with the looks of your character, then think about how you're going to conceal or decorate these necessary elements. Okay. So I've got the body of the character now, and I want to add my eyes. So the most interesting part is the eyes for me. I will use my piece of non-recyclable tag from my fruits and veg and cut out with my scissors 2 fairly big eyes. So make sure they actually fit onto the character. This is where I've mentioned proportion. So think about the proportion. Okay, I've got one eye here. I will maybe use blue tack to attach it. I'll make another eye now. So cutting my eye, I'm now considering that I still need to decorate it with my permanent marker, which I've prepared. So before I tape it, I will draw the iris on it. The pupil, not the iris, the pupil. So a permanent marker is your best friend when working with these recycled materials because all of them have different surfaces, different textures. Not every felt tip or pen will actually leave a mark and they can smudge horribly. So for this reason, a permanent marker of whichever color, a Sharpie, will be quite good to use. So I've got my 2 eyes. Brilliant. Now, a piece of my blue tack. Just a small bit will suffice, even for both the eyes. You want to be thinking of how to minimize your waste. So what's the smallest amount that you can use? And maybe you can then reuse it later. You know, it doesn't always have to stay this way, but I want you to start considering a more minimalist approach and what impact your actions have. So I'm attaching one eye with my blue tack, now the second eye, and we are slowly but steadily coming towards our time limit for the workshop. So at this point, I really want you to start thinking that within the next 5 minutes, you might have something that you consider a fairly good character design for the purpose of this workshop. Now, looking at what I've got, it actually doesn't look so interesting to me. So I want maybe another element. Maybe I've just decided I will add some decoration. Okay, I've got some more netting here. And this actually comes with a nice string, which I can cut off. Okay. Now, I can tie this string as a scarf, maybe, or a headpiece. Ooh, okay, my arm fell off, but don't worry, I will attach it later. And I will maybe tie this headpiece around to decorate. So whilst you are finishing your characters or decorating them, you can start to think about how many characters you can actually make at home, just with the rubbish that you have. Can you make a family of characters? Can you make a more elaborate character or a bigger sized character? Can you make a puppet or an action figure? So hopefully this workshop shows you the creative freedom and opportunity that is so important to artists working from home in terms of not having enough materials. So you don't have to feel restricted by not having all the professional materials if you think creatively with what you have. So if you've got recyclables and if you've got things that would end up in the bin, like a toothbrush head, can you use it for a character? Okay, I've attached my scarf and I will cut a bit of it off because it's covering my character's face. I will reattach my arm with a bit more paper tape. I'll go for the stronger paper tape because I've learned now that the blue one doesn't really work. So reattaching my arm with paper tape from the backside of the character. I have to say it looks quite strange. You don't always have to be happy with the character you make. It's good food for thought anyway. You can make something better next time. So as long as you learn from your mistakes and shortcomings, that's the purpose of life. Okay. Now I've made the eyes a bit bigger. I think it's missing a mouth, and we're approaching our time limit now, guys. So really do start thinking towards finishing. I think, ooh, okay, so you see this is my optical cable from internet installation, which I saved. So I can maybe use the texture of my piece of metal to tie this through. So create some kind of a, how am I going to do this? Okay, this way. So problem solving all the way through. How will you then attach these strings? Okay, that's quite cute. So I can make a smiley mouth by poking this through the holes. And, oh, perfect. Okay, so without even knowing, I've actually created a positionable mouth. Here's a smiley mouth. Here's a sad face. Okay, and this will be great to animate now. Or here's an indifferent face. Smiley and a sad face. Okay, so it doesn't still look great. I'm going to attach a little bit more tape on the back of it to minimize the messiness and chaos of it. But I'd like you to be finishing your designs now. As I've already said before, I don't want to pressure you, but this will be the time to finish with your first ever design, do the final cleanup. And okay, so now have your design, place your design in front of you and try to evaluate its strength, its strength as character design. How good do you think it is? How could you make it better? So, looking at my character, I'm actually quite pleased because it's got a good color contrast, although it's a bit difficult to see without a clear background here. So, okay, I've got a color variation, I've used transparent materials, I've got positionable elements of the character. That's quite good. Now, moving on from making your character, I want to give you some advice on what you can do with your design after the workshop. So you can progress what you've made in the to be continued stage after the workshop by storyboarding. So storyboarding is about visually pre-planning your story through something like a comic. So drawing what will happen in your animation process or in the film and imagining what will happen in that story. So if you have to think about what your characters would do or what your character would do, what genre would he be figuring in, he, it, she? So would it be a comedy, drama, thriller? If you want to draw it later, I would like you to create a minimum 3-panel storyboard. What the storyboard looks like, here's an example. This has 8 panels, as you can see, and it's got some writing under it as well to clarify to the creator or the director. If you want to write down the story, that's fine too. A second example of the storyboard, which simply communicates visually, is here from Lilo and Stitch. So using strength of drawing and expression of the characters to communicate the story without any words. So there's actually no dialogue or no monologue in this scene, but the strength of the character design and facial expressions can communicate everything that is needed. So when you are drawing your storyboards, you can consider the basic 3-act structure. This is why I said that you can use a minimum 3-panel storyboard. So in the beginning, in your first panel, this is the introduction to the story. In the middle is when something happens. So either your character meets someone else or your character maybe explodes. Maybe that's the ending. Okay, so maybe in the middle, your character finds 500 pounds on the ground. And in the resolution, what happens? It explodes or returns the money or becomes rich, or maybe some unexpected climax happens. So in your resolution, this is the 3rd panel of your storyboard. Moving on from storyboarding, this is the important bit if you want to animate your characters or if you want to animate in stop motion in the future. So take a look at these free available software apps. You might already have it on your phones and iPads if you enjoy stop motion animation. So my app of choice is Stop Motion Studio. It's available on iOS and Android. And in the worksheet you will receive, there is both links to the App Store and to the Play Store. So you can freely download this. It's got really good quality. It's a really good quality software. So in terms of my advice for you, if you maybe haven't animated before, or if you need to know the specifics, I would advise you to aim for 5 to 10 seconds of animation. So 5 to 10 seconds actually means you will need to take about 60 or 120 pictures, something in between that number. So a vast number of pictures and a great amount of time that you might spend doing this. That is if you set your frame rate to 12.5 frames. So in animation, usually you would be working on 25 frames per second or 24 frames per second. To compare this with real film, film is usually shot at 30 or 60 frames per second. So HD films in high definition, they will be at least 60 frames per second. So you can see within that 1 second of footage, you can see a lot of definition. In animation, we can get away with using 24 or 12.5 frames to make our life a bit easier, to decrease the time that we have to spend. So if you are shooting at 12.5 frames per second, this means you have to take 12.5 or 12 pictures for every second of your footage. This is why I've included the calculation here. So aim for 5 to 10 seconds of animation. That's quite manageable. Now you can also be animating on twos. Animating on twos means you will be taking the same picture twice. This will increase your frame duration. So that same picture will be there twice. So imagine I'm taking the animation of this movement. Every time it comes into position where I need to take a picture, I'll take the picture twice. Then I'll move on, take the picture twice, and take the picture twice. Instead of doing it one time, which means it will be very fast, it will actually be a bit slower. It will also, though, become more jaggedy. So it will decrease your work, but it will also decrease smoothness. So think about this when you're setting up your frame rate and estimating how much time you're willing to spend. Visually, to show you what Stop Motion Studio looks like, if you haven't used it before, here are your frames, your individual frames that you can review, and your timeline, playhead, where you can actually see what you've done and the number of frames so you can keep a track of it. I want you to be looking at the settings. When you're setting up your frame rate, this is where you will find it, in this settings symbol, and you can then set up your frame rate to the 12.5. If you want to be working at a lower quality, lower smoothness, you can use 4 or 8 frames per second, but industry standard advice is 12.5. So this is the moment where I kindly thank you for participating in this workshop. And in case you're interested to see some of my animation or illustration or stop motion work, my Instagram is @funghostart. And at this point, I would like to hand you over to Olivia. And if you want to share your creations with us, I would highly encourage you to do so. I'd be really happy and pleased to see it. So thank you for your attention, everyone, and for participating.
Great, thank you, Valentina. That was brilliant. I hope everyone enjoyed that. We will be taking any questions, as Valentina has mentioned. So if you do have questions that you'd like to ask, please pop them in the chat. And we can either put them to Valentina, or if you're happy to share your work, let us know by putting yes in the chat, and we'll facilitate you coming on screen one by one and sharing that with us. In the meantime, I have some information for you. So you have a bit of time if you want to think of those questions, put them in there, and we'll address those in a moment. So before we do finish up, I just want to remind you that we have many more workshops for you to get involved in that are part of the Summer School series. These cover a huge range of creative practices, from designing album covers, expressive painting, through to creating your own 3D characters on free software like Blender. So these give you an insight into lots of different areas that your creativity could take you, and the many different jobs that exist across the creative industries. If you haven't already, if you'd like to book your place, you can visit the website, and we'll send you a link to that in the chat. We are also offering a very exciting opportunity to receive an official NUA certificate as part of the summer school. In order to get hold of one of these precious certificates, we are looking for you to attend 6 out of the 12 workshops, and we really want to see outcomes from at least 3 of those workshops. You can send your 3 outcomes to us at student.recruitment@nua.ac.uk. these outcomes could be something you've made during the workshop, but they could also be something that you've made in your own time in response to the workshop. So for example, for today, it could be the character that you've designed very simply, just a photograph, or it could be a short animation that you've then made in your free time afterwards. We would absolutely love to see that. So we also really want to see what you're making throughout the summer school series. So if you're posting photographs on Instagram, please do tag us at NUA Outreach. We'd love to see them, and we'll be sharing some of our favourite pieces across the summer and throughout the series. So do get involved in that as well. And we'll pop, oh, I think my colleague has already popped it in the chat for you. Each week, very exciting, we'll also be giving away 1 NUA Chili's bottle per week, and all you have to do to be in with a chance of winning one of those is fill out our weekly feedback form that will be circulating at the end of each week. So there's lots of chances there across the whole summer school to win your very own Chili's bottle. We will now hang around for a few minutes in case any questions come in, but if anybody does want to share their work, we would love to see it and discuss how you found the workshop. So we'll be here for a few moments more, but in the meantime, thank you Valentina as well, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you everyone. And a shout out to my cousins if you've participated.
Lovely, love that. So we've got some lovely comments in the chat. So lots of thank yous, but thank you all for joining and taking part. Thank you from the cousins. Brilliant. Valentina, I love the addition of the mouth. It made the whole thing. Oh. Perfect.
Yes, yes, it changed my life. The discovery that this can be positioned.
It makes it, just gives it so much character instantly.
Indeed. So now I've got a family of 2
yes
necking trousers with
paper. I think you should make us a little animation.
Oh, that's a very good idea. So
so we've had one question. What sort of animation do you study on the animation course?
So in my 3 years of studying the animation BA course, I've gone through the whole range of techniques. So this course, although it's a specialist arts university, they don't ask you to specialize in any animation technique unless you choose to. So in my first year, we've done a lot of tasks in 2D hand-drawn and then 2D digitally drawn, and also done an introduction to stop motion and an introduction to 3D CGI. So at that point in the first year, towards the end of your first year, you could then start to see where your skills lie. And in second year, you can then expand on them or get new skills. So in the case of my practice, I felt a strong inclination towards stop motion, not claymation. Claymation made with clay or plasticine, for me, is quite fiddly because of the material. So what I specialized in is puppet stop motion. So working in 3D model making those puppets, and then as well as model making, you can animate them. So double the work, but extremely rewarding. As well as this, I've also done 2D digital cutout animation. So today's workshop is very much about traditional 2D cutout using actual real life materials. You can also do this digitally in software such as After Effects or Toon Boom. And Adobe is taught at the uni. So if you don't have any previous experience with Photoshop or Adobe After Effects or Premiere, etc., they will teach you this through the course. But for me, I haven't done any before, and I really enjoyed learning about it. So my technique of choice is 2D digital cutout. But you study everything and anything that you want to focus on. So it can be experimental, it can be traditional.
And it is amazing when you're kind of in the studios, in the animation studios, and you see some of the models that people have made with all of their kind of movable elements. It's absolutely incredible. It's for someone like me who doesn't know a lot about animation, it's incredible what students can make coming to the course without any prior experience, but then by the end of their time at NUA, the amazing masterpieces that they're able to create in these models is amazing. Great, so I don't think anyone else has any questions. I'll leave it like another 30 seconds, but if not, I think we'll leave it there for today. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. We hope this has been useful and have a great day. And we hope to see plenty of you tomorrow for the next summer school workshop.
Thanks everyone. All the best with your summers.
Great, so no more questions. So I'll end the meeting now, but thank you again and hopefully see you soon. So bye everyone.
Bye-bye.